It's easy to mistake the 2025 true crime mockumentary Strange Harvest: Occult Murder in the Inland Empire as another entry into the endless backlog of pop sensationalist true crime documentaries on Netflix. However, this is entirely by design, as writer, director, producer, and editor Stuart Ortez, one of the vicious brothers behind the cult ghost hunting satire Grave Encounters, returns to his roots a decade later with a deeply strange and gruesomely startling tale about two homicide detectives in Southern California trying to track down an elusive serial killer called Albert Shiney. With the case spanning over 3 decades with a 15-year cooling off period in between, Strange Harvest sees detectives Joseph Kirby and Alexis Taylor detail a series of profoundly shocking ritualistic murders connected purely by a single enigmatic symbol that to this day they've yet to fully comprehend. What unfolds is your fairly traditional modern documentary template that authentically replicates the brooding cinematic artifice originally popularized by Making a Murderer and subsequently capitalized on by practically every other true crime documentary ever since, especially those helmed under executive producer Joe Berlinger. Granted, while the true crime flair had already long existed prior, most notably through Errol Morris's The Thin Blue Line, as Stuart Ortez told Horror Press, the media literacy around these current trending documentaries offers the opportunity to potentially capture the zeitgeist of what the Blair Witch Project accomplished over 25 years ago. As Ortez explained, Strange Harvest is not tongue-in-cheek or satirical or farcical in any way. It plays itself completely straight, arguably nearly to its own detriment, as it isn't trying to be anything besides the very thing it wants unsuspecting viewers to believe it is. Inspired by the documentary Tiger King, the film captures how life can oftentimes be stranger than fiction, because without giving too much away just yet, the film takes a very bold swing in its revelations that understandably isn't going to work for everyone. Personally, my opinion on Strange Harvest is honestly not too far off my feelings towards Grave Encounters, in that I love its unflinching commitment to its setup, but as it begins to bite off more than it can chew, it sometimes feels just a little too try-hard with its scares when less would have been more. Nonetheless, it's certainly one of the more intriguing horror mockumentaries I've seen in recent memory, and leaves a fair bit to unpack when you consider its ending. It's obviously not on the same level as Lake Mongo and The Bay, my two favourite horror mockumentaries, but its surprise pivot to another subgenre roughly halfway through does give it a unique appeal worth experiencing. So if you're ready for some good old nasty true crime shenanigans, brace yourself. Now, before we dive deeper into despair, this video is sponsored by Odoo. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software designed for business owners to optimize their workflow by providing more than 45 apps, from accounting, inventory, project management to my personal favorite, website creation. Odoo's website app is an absolute must for anyone looking to create an efficient, easy-to-use, stylishly professional website without any of the time-consuming, brain-melting madness. You simply define the specific type of website you're making, your industry, and goals, then choose your color palette or upload your logo, select the pages and features you need, pick one of the many diverse themes, and let Odoo do the rest. With the structure in place, you can use Odoo's intuitive drag and drop feature to select from a range of category blocks that fit your needs, and use the grid to precisely organize them. For example, if I want to make a custom page dedicated to my videos, I can effortlessly embed the videos, edit color, text, add graphics and animation, and basically lose myself in the joy of design to make my website personal, unique, and engaging. I don't have to have any coding or design experience or read some arduous instruction manual. The interface is clear, simple, and accessible to anyone, thus taking out all the hassle. Your first Odoo app is free for life with unlimited hosting and support, and the website app includes a free personalized domain name for the first year. You can start building your online presence today for free by clicking the link in the description. Our harrowing tale begins in medias res, where on July 9th, 2010, Katie Porter calls for a wellness check on her friend Tiffany Sheridan, prompting the responding officers to soon discover the entire Sheridan family bound and deceased, with their bodies posed as if praying to the mysterious blood-drawn symbol on the ceiling. The coroner later concludes that the family died from blood loss after being slowly drained through their femoral arteries, scorching a ghoulish powerful message into the back of your mind that we are not dealing with a random impulsive killer, but rather one with a deranged yet meticulously unclear motive. From here, detectives Kirby and Taylor recount 3 prior killings between 1993 and 1995 that, while initially had no connection, investigators came to understand they were linked to a seemingly satanic ritualistic killer who called himself Albert Shiny. Now, don't worry, I won't be going through every single horrific murder that happens in this film, but the first 3 killings do set an imprint for what's going to follow and will help give context to my later criticism. The first murder was a sex worker called Safra Gutierrez, who was mutilated, dismembered, and had her uterus removed, but the case was written off due to how sex workers and marginalized communities statistically were overlooked in police reporting. However, the distinct contrast in the second 2 murders made it difficult to establish a clear MO, as we had an 82-year-old middle-class bedbound patient called Ambrose Griffith, who was bludgeoned and stabbed 30 times before he had his eye removed, and lastly 12-year-old Noah Lafone, who was abducted on October 7, 1995, and his body discovered brutally decomposed in a secluded lake and his liver removed. If you're feeling at all disgusted by this point, know that this is only a taste of Strange Harvest's aggressively nasty and unpredictable nature that makes it so that you're never prepared for the next nightmarish killing. But at the same time, the overindulgence on the violence serves to, indirectly or not, evoke the inherently sensationalist and exploitative culture of true crime entertainment. I discussed this in my Red Rooms video, so I'm not going to retread the same moral debate. I'm not here to judge anyone's morbid curiosity because I'm both the target demographic and I make videos on dark subject matter, if granted predominantly fictitious. However, it is a case-by-case basis for me on whether I appreciate horror that shows restraint or has the balls to show everything in all its gruesome glory, and with Strange Harvest, it sorta tiptoes the line of needing that transgression to truly sell the evil we're dealing with, and being overly gratuitous for pure shock value. All due respect to what the filmmakers possibly intended, but there is a bit of an edgelord provocateur quality that I don't mind in the grand scheme of things. I'm not going to lose sleep over it, but it's an approach that doesn't fully sit right with me because while the film clearly wants me to feel disgusted, enraged, and even offended, it overcompensates on excess to the detriment of having any real long-term impact. Don't get me wrong, the intended imagery is despicably imaginative, none of which I can obviously show without getting demonetized, but I'll admit I grew desensitized to it by the end due to its overuse, diminishing the emotional effect it was likely going for. Everything in moderation, as they say. I'm not accusing the film of being fetishistic, it's none of that Ryan Murphy monster bollocks, but rather than restraining itself to a few brutal components, it sort of becomes a Frankenstein's collage of real-life killers like Robert Yates, Ted Bundy, the Manson family, Randy Kraft, Donald Harvey, the Zodiac, Richard Ramirez, and that's only to name a few that come to mind, and thus indirectly give Shiny less of an identity of his own. Again, respectfully, I don't think it takes away from the conceit of its setup. Ortiz is clearly well-researched and deeply passionate about the subject matter, but I guess you could argue there is potentially a case for overexerting your passion and being unable to rein in your focus. I will contradict myself here and say there is a way to justify why this actually works when you see how the film ends, but there is a notable disconnect when it starts introducing Shiny's motive more directly, using an extensive range of encyclopedic babble that I'll concede is just beyond my personal interest and comprehension. While I can imagine many people will be attracted to specific buzzwords that I again will admit I do not understand, the film is very broad with introducing an ancient ritualistic motive, as it's believed Shiny traveled the world during his cooling off period to research a wide variety of beliefs, practices, and superstitions to prepare himself for his next series of killings. It does eventually make sense why it's so contrived, but outside the unknown symbol found at every crime scene, the first major obscure element to investigators since 1995 is Shiny's reference to the name Caliban. This is not the only confused paradox I'll bring up. I was conflicted with how it explains all these concepts, but when I thought about it longer in retrospect, there is a brilliant misdirection slowly at play when detectives dismiss Shiny's cryptic letters and research as nonsensical themselves and downplay him as a narcissistic psychopath relishing in the infamy. However, the film at this point subverts evident comparisons to the Poughkeepsie tapes by not only revealing Shiny's true identity surprisingly early on, but leaning into the nihilism that both detectives constantly feel as they dismiss the reality of Shiny's motive. Okay, so I have to reveal a pretty significant spoiler at this point that is hinted at early in the story, but I wanted to withhold it purely for dramatic effect. Strange Harvest is actually a cosmic horror. The story introduces a sort of Lovecraftian Cthulhu type affair when we look at the name Caliban as a reference to the half-breed creature in Shakespeare's The Tempest, who was enslaved by that story's protagonist, an exiled sorcerer, to protect him and assist in enacting revenge against those who betrayed him. To quote the killer's own letter, Albert Shiny, whose real name is confirmed to be Leslie Sykes, has been transfigured into Caliban. In other words, Sykes has become a slave to a higher being to do his bidding. That higher being, you ask, is essentially an eldritch leech, as inferred to by not only the Call of Cthulhu-esque painting in the home Sykes is renting, but the fact that most victims are surrounded by blood-sucking leeches. I wouldn't be surprised if I've lost a lot of people at this point, but the general idea is that all of Sykes' victims are chosen at random as part of a sacrificial blood ritual that, in my theory, is meant to unleash this vengeful deity from another dimension with a motive seemingly akin to the Tempest. Again, the movie keeps it very ambiguous, so you may be thinking, oh well, maybe Sykes is just utterly insane and it's all in the head of some overactive, imaginative, meditative murder hippie, but even before the climax that basically confirms the cosmic stuff to be real, we see Sykes seemingly summon a dimensional wormhole that's obscured by a glitching webcam. The detectives do eventually find someone who knows of Sykes' existence called Jared Kelly, who explains that the last he saw of Sykes was during a hiking trip in Joshua Tree many years prior, where Sykes talked about having a religious experience in a secluded cave. The implication seems to be that the deity made itself known to Sykes, eventually calling back to a telescope found in the garden of the rented property, where it seems Sykes was drawn to an obscure constellation known as Ophiuchus. According to a skeptical geobiologist, Ophiuchus symbolized the serpent bearer, a man battling a giant snake, or in the case of this cosmic madness, a massive fucking leech. But what makes this constellation significant, however, is that once every 800 years, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury align in triangular formation, and thus when matched with the leech bite, the elusive symbol finally has its purpose. The story culminates in an urgent manhunt before the planets can align, but more so because Sykes kills a family and abducts a 3-month-old baby and ventures deep into the forest. Thus, regardless of what the detectives believe by this point, Sykes is still fully committed to his ritual. It's here where the film boldly shows its hand by revealing a mysterious illumination in the sky between where the planets align, as though something came through onto our Earth, confirming my speculation that Sykes was ultimately trying to open a portal. Thankfully, Sykes is gunned down before he can immolate the baby, with one of the surviving officers of the shootout describing the cosmic phenomenon as like staring into red eyes, a sentiment Sykes told Jared Kelly after returning from the Joshua Tree cave. However, Sykes does briefly manage to escape, but his body is soon unceremoniously discovered down near the lake where his face is being consumed by leeches, a fitting irony to how he left his victims, as now Sykes has been abandoned by his own god. There is an almost suitably unfulfilling quality to its ending, because while it does confirm something cosmic has occurred to give truth to Sykes' motivations, it comes back to that notion of life being stranger than fiction. Those interviewed continue to live in ignorance over what happened. They're still left just as perplexed and uncertain about the entire ordeal, and have essentially gained no new insight from it. As I said earlier, there's this acutely subversive nihilism to the fact that something else is clearly going on in the universe. In fact, for all we know, unbeknownst to the detectives, they might have actually saved the world from this leech demon deity thing. But both Kirby and Taylor refuse to acknowledge anything otherworldly or that what happened was of any importance to humanity or our knowledge of the universe, somewhat ironically diminishing the profound loss of life as even all the more pointless. As both detectives cynically declare, same shit, different day, it taps into the general reality of these crimes, pointless, meaningless loss of life. Yet the twist here is that actually there's a morbid insight on display if they reach beyond conventional logic. What's even more bleak is that the mother of one of the victims, Victoria, points out how the only thing that is ultimately true and remembered about these horrible crimes is the killer himself, who has been forever immortalized. When you sit and break apart the layers, it does add something new to the nihilism and inconceivableness of cosmic horror, in how even with all these literal sacrifices and confirmation that something cosmic did in fact occur, the grand plan does not work out. Even the deity does not technically win, at least in my reading of it. And to that, so what? A final letter from Sykes prior to his death says he'll be back in 800 years anyway, so it'll just keep trying to get what it wants. Going back to the conflicted discussion I had earlier regarding Sykes traveling all around the world, there is a paradox in how the outcome is made all the more pointless by the fact that it could have had a point had Sykes actually succeeded. It's ultimately why I think the cosmic angle is both needed and brilliant to the story. Usually the thesis is how murders are ultimately an empty waste of life, whereas Strange Harvest leaves us with Pandora's box left unopened. In fact, it doubles down on this by showing in the post-credits Kirby going in search of the very cave Sykes made his discovery, suggesting the deity continues to wait for someone to find it, the agony of which is that curiosity will always continue to linger. And with that madness complete, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't. It really does help out the video. And until next time, stay safe, stay away from leeches, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.